For 6 months the doctors told us it was impossible, but a secret, whispered prayer in the dead of night would soon prove them all wrong. The silence was the worst part. Before the accident our house was a symphony of chaos. The thunder of little feet on the hardwood floors, the shrieks of laughter during a pillow fight, the endless overlapping questions that only 5-year-old twin boys can generate. Leo and Liam. They were my world, my everything. Now the only sounds were the quiet hum of medical equipment and the soft rhythmic puff of the ventilator that helped Liam breathe at night. The laughter was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like it had a physical weight, pressing down on my chest every time I walked through the front door. It had been 6 months since the crash. 6 months since a drunk driver turned our world upside down. My wife, Sarah, had minor injuries. I was thankfully at work. But my boys, my vibrant, energetic boys, had borne the brunt of it. The diagnosis from a dozen different specialists was always the same, delivered with a somber, practiced pity. Severe spinal cord injury. Irreversible paralysis from the waist down. You need to start accepting the new reality. Acceptance. I hated that word. To me it sounded like surrender. I'm an engineer. My entire life is about finding solutions to problems. If a bridge can't support a load, you reinforce it. If a circuit is broken, you find the fault and fix it. But I couldn't fix my sons. I poured all our savings, cashed in my retirement, and sold my prized classic car to fund consultations with experts across the globe. We tried experimental therapies, physical rehabilitation that felt more like torture, and every piece of cutting-edge technology I could find. Nothing worked. The doctors would just shake their heads, their eyes full of that same weary sympathy, and tell us to focus on quality of life. Sarah, bless her heart, was handling it differently. While I buried myself in medical journals and research papers, she turned to faith. I'd find candles lit in the living room, hear her whispering prayers when she thought I wasn't listening. I wasn't a religious man. I believed in physics, in biology, in things I could see and measure. Her faith felt like a foreign language, a comfort I couldn't understand, and, if I'm being honest, resented a little. It felt like she was giving up, accepting a fate I was still fighting tooth and nail against. About 2 months ago, Sarah insisted we hire more help. I was working from home to be with the boys, but the round-the-clock care was destroying us both. We were exhausted, snapping at each other, hollowed-out shells of the people we used to be. So, we hired Maria. She was a middle-aged woman from a small village in Guatemala, with kind, deep-set eyes and a quiet disposition. Her references were impeccable, and she had experience with in-home care. To me, she was just there, a quiet presence in the background, cleaning, cooking, and helping Sarah with the boys' difficult daily routines. She was efficient, respectful, and never overstepped. She spoke little English, and I spoke even less Spanish, so our interactions were limited to polite nods and gestures. But I noticed how she looked at Leo and Liam. It wasn't with pity, like the doctors, or with the frantic, desperate love that I felt. It was with a profound, almost serene sadness, but underneath it, there was something else, a flicker of something I couldn't name. Last night I came home late after a brutal meeting with a new neurologist. It was another dead end, another, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Evans, but there's nothing more we can do." I was defeated, drained of all hope, and all I wanted was a glass of whiskey and the oblivion of sleep. The house was dark and silent, except for the faint glow of a nightlight from the boys' downstairs bedroom. Sarah was already asleep upstairs, I assumed, emotionally spent, as always. As I passed their door, I heard something. It wasn't the ventilator or the creak of the house settling. It was a voice, a soft rhythmic murmur, almost like a chant. It was Maria. Curiosity, tinged with irritation that she was still here so late, got the better of me. I pushed the door open just a crack, peering into the dim light, and what I saw froze me to the spot. The whiskey, the exhaustion, everything vanished. Maria wasn't cleaning. She was on her knees on the floor between my boys' 2 small beds. In her hands she clutched a simple, dark wooden rosary, the beads worn smooth with use. Her head was bowed, Her eyes were closed, and from her lips flowed a stream of quiet, fervent Spanish. Her voice was thick with an emotion so raw, so potent, it seemed to fill the room. She wasn't just reciting words, she was pleading, bargaining with a power I couldn't comprehend. My first instinct was a surge of hot, protective anger. Who was this woman to come into my son's room and perform? What was this? Some kind of ritual? My scientific mind recoiled. This was my house, my children, my tragedy. I dealt with it using logic, data, and the best medical minds money could buy. This felt like an intrusion, a violation. It felt like she was preying on our vulnerability, peddling false hope in the form of ancient superstitions. I took a step forward, ready to storm in, to demand she stop this nonsense and get out. But something held me back. Maybe it was the utter lack of performance in her actions. She wasn't doing this for us, for an audience. She thought she was alone. Her shoulders were slumped with a weariness I knew all too well, the weariness of carrying a grief that never ends. And as I watched, she finished her prayer, lifted her head, and her eyes, glistening with unshed tears in the dim light, fell upon my son's. She reached out a hand, her skin weathered and creased from a life of hard work, and gently, reverently, laid it on Leo's cuff. His leg, which hadn't moved on its own in half a year, lay limp and still under her touch. She whispered something more, words I couldn't understand, but whose meaning was universal. A mother's plea, a prayer for healing. She then moved her hand to Liam's leg, repeating the gesture, her touch so tender it made my throat ache. I saw the slack, lifeless limbs of my children, the boys who used to race each other across the park until they collapsed in a heap of giggles. And I saw this woman, a stranger, pouring out her soul for them in the dead of night. My anger began to curdle, replaced by a profound and unsettling confusion. Sarah must have put her up to this. This was her doing, another one of her desperate grasps at faith while I was trying to deal with reality. The resentment I felt earlier returned, sharp and bitter. We were supposed to be a team, but she was going behind my back with this witch doctor stuff. Finally, Maria made the sign of the cross, her movements slow and deliberate. She pressed her lips to the crucifix of her rosary, then rose silently to her feet. She pulled the blankets up to the boys' chins, her movements filled with a quiet maternal grace. For a moment she just stood there, a silent guardian between their beds, before turning and walking towards the door. I stumbled back into the darkness of the hallway just as she slipped out, pulling the door almost closed behind her. She didn't see me. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind a war zone of conflicting thoughts. Logic fought against an emotion I couldn't name. Fury fought against a strange, unwelcome flicker of something. I didn't know what it was. Finally, a cold resolve settled over me. I had to talk to Sarah. Now. I turned and stalked up the stairs, each step heavy with accusation. I would wake her up. I would demand to know what she was thinking, allowing this circus to happen under our roof, in our children's bedroom. I pushed open our bedroom door, the words already forming on my tongue, ready to unleash the storm of my frustration and betrayal. But the words died in my throat. Sarah wasn't asleep. She was sitting up in bed, the faint light from the hallway illuminating the tear tracks on her cheeks. She was looking right at me, her expression not one of surprise, but of weary resignation, as if she'd been waiting for this confrontation all along. Before I could say a word, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. She does it every night, Mark. She has for weeks. I just stared at her, speechless. Every night, for weeks. The anger I had brought upstairs with me evaporated, replaced by a disorienting sense of being completely adrift. I had prided myself on being the one in control, the one with the plan, the one who saw everything. Yet this had been happening, nightly, right under my nose, in the heart of my home. I felt like a stranger in my own life. You knew, I finally managed, my voice hoarse. You knew and you didn't tell me? What was I supposed to tell you, Mark? Sarah's voice was fragile, laced with a familiar exhaustion. That our maid is praying for our sons? You would have scoffed. You would have told me it was hocus pocus. You would have fired her. And I couldn't bear to take that away. Take what away? I demanded, stepping further into the room. False hope? Delusion? Sarah, we have to deal with reality. The doctors said. I know what the doctors said, she snapped, a flash of her old fire returning. I was there, remember. I've sat in every sterile office. I've heard the word irreversible so many times it doesn't even sound like a word anymore. But what have the doctors done for them, Mark? What has all your research and your data and your expensive specialists actually changed? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unanswerable. She was right. For all my frantic efforts, for all the money we'd spent, Leo and Liam were exactly the same as they were 6 months ago. Paralyzed, trapped in their own bodies. Maria gives me something you don't, Sarah continued, her voice softening again. She gives me a sliver of peace. When I see her, when I hear her praying, she has a faith that's so absolute, so pure. She truly believes a miracle is possible. And sometimes, just for a second, she makes me believe it too. Is that so wrong? To want to believe in a miracle for our own children? I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. I didn't know what to think anymore. The foundations of my world, built on logic and evidence, were cracking. What if I was the one who was wrong? What if my stubborn refusal to entertain anything beyond the measurable world was the real delusion? I thought about Maria's face in the dim light of the boys' room, the profound empathy, the unwavering conviction. It wasn't the face of a charlatan. She told me about her own son, Sarah said quietly, pulling me from my thoughts. Back in her village. He fell from a tree when he was a boy. Broke his back. The village had no doctor. They all said he would never walk again. She prayed for 40 days and 40 nights. And on the 41st day, he stood up. I looked up at her, my skepticism warring with the raw emotion in her story. Sarah, that's just a story. It's anecdotal. There could be 100 explanations. Or there could be one, she interrupted, her eyes locking onto mine. Please, Mark, don't do anything. Just let it be. Let her pray. What can it possibly hurt? What could it hurt? That was the question, wasn't it? The engineer in me screamed that it hurt because it distracted from real solutions. It fostered a dangerous reliance on fantasy. But the father in me, the broken, desperate father in me, was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there were things in the universe that my science couldn't explain. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the boys' room over and over. The next few days were strange. I started observing Maria more closely. I saw her touch the boys' heads when she thought no one was looking, muttering a quiet blessing. I saw her leave a small, hand-carved wooden bird on Leo's bedside table. I still didn't believe, not really, but I stopped seeing her actions as an intrusion. Instead, I saw them for what they were, an act of profound love and hope. I didn't tell her I knew. Sarah and I didn't speak of it again. An unspoken truce settled between us. She had her faith, I had my research, and Maria had her prayers. A week later, I was in the boys' room, trying to work on my laptop while they had their afternoon nap. The physical therapist had been over earlier, a session that had left both boys drained and despondent. It was always the hardest part of the day. They would try so hard to move, to make their bodies obey, and the failure was a fresh wound every single time. Liam, who was more prone to frustration, had been crying quietly before he drifted off. The house was still. The only sound was the soft puff of Liam's ventilator and the clicking of my keyboard. I was reviewing a new clinical trial from a Swiss research institute, clinging to the familiar comfort of data and peer-reviewed studies. Suddenly, a sound from across the room made me look up. It was a small sound, a rustle of bed sheets. I glanced over at Leo's bed. He was fast asleep, his face peaceful. I turned back to my screen, dismissing it. Then I heard it again, louder this time, a distinct, deliberate sound. Scrape. Thump. My blood ran cold. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes scanning the room. Everything was as it should be. The monitors beeped in their steady rhythm. Both boys were asleep. I must have imagined it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. And then I saw it. On the floor, next to Leo's bed, lay the little wooden bird Maria had left him. It hadn't been there before. It had been on his bedside table, a good 2 feet away. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A vibration. Had he knocked it off in his sleep? But he couldn't move. His arms were always secured to prevent him from pulling at his monitors. He couldn't have reached it. It was impossible. My gaze shot from the bird on the floor back to the sleeping form of my son. And that's when I saw his foot. It was twitching. I couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to that one, tiny, impossible movement. A flicker. A spasm. It was nothing. And it was everything. For 6 months Leo's lower body had been as still and lifeless as marble. I had watched countless hours of video, studied MRI scans, and memorized every medical chart. I knew the electrical signals from his brain were severed, cut off completely by the damage to his spine. A twitch was not possible. Yet I had seen it. My laptop clattered to the floor as I scrambled to my feet and rushed to his bedside. My heart was a drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure it would wake him. I knelt down, my eyes glued to his foot, which was now perfectly still again beneath the thin cotton blanket. Was I losing my mind? Had the stress and lack of sleep finally conjured a hallucination born of sheer desperation? "Leo," I whispered, my voice trembling. I gently pulled back the blanket. His leg was just as it always was, pale and motionless. I reached out a shaking hand and laid it on his calf. The muscle was soft, without tone. There was nothing. A wave of crushing disappointment washed over me. I had imagined it. Of course I had. Defeated, I let my head fall into my hands, the momentary, electrifying hope leaving a bitter, hollow ache in its place. It was worse than no hope at all. And then I felt it. Under my palm, faint but undeniable. A flutter. A tiny, minuscule contraction of the muscle in his calf. My head snapped up. I stared at his leg, holding my breath. "Leo," I said, my voice louder now. "Son, can you hear me? Can you try to move your toes?" His eyelids flickered, but he remained asleep. But then it happened again. The muscle under my hand tightened. A brief, solid pulse of life. And this time, I saw it clearly. His big toe, the one that hadn't moved in 187 days, I knew the exact number, curled downward. It was a small movement, barely a centimeter, but it might as well have been an earthquake. "Sarah, Sarah, get in here, now!" I roared, my voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't even name. It was terror and elation and disbelief all tangled together. Sarah burst into the room, her face a mask of panic, Maria right behind her. "What is it? What's wrong?" I couldn't form a sentence. I just pointed, my finger shaking, at Leo's foot. "Look," I croaked. She followed my gaze, her eyes wide with confusion. And as if on command, as if my son was hearing me even in his sleep, the toe curled again, deliberately. A gasp escaped Sarah's lips, a sound somewhere between a sob and a prayer. She dropped to her knees beside me, her hand flying to her mouth. Maria stood in the doorway, her hands clasped to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. She wasn't surprised. She was witnessing the answer to a question she had never stopped asking. We called Dr. Matthews, the boy's primary neurologist. I explained what I saw, my voice high and strained, probably sounding like a lunatic. He was skeptical, of course, telling me it was likely an involuntary muscle spasm, a reflex arc, nothing more. But I insisted. I demanded he come. When he arrived an hour later, Leo was awake, and so was Liam, both of them agitated by the frantic energy in the room. Dr. Matthews conducted his examination with a professional, placating air. He tapped Leo's knees with his reflex hammer. Nothing. He ran a pin along the sole of his foot. Nothing. He looked at me with that familiar, pitying expression. "Mark, as I said, it was likely just a postsynaptic potential, a random firing of—" "Ask him to do it," I interrupted, my voice steely. "Ask him to move his toe." Dr. Matthews sighed but turned to my son. "Leo, buddy, can you try and wiggle your toes for me, just like we practiced?" We all held our breath. Leo's face screwed up in concentration, the way it did when he was trying to build a particularly difficult Lego tower. He stared down at his feet, his little brow furrowed. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. I could feel Sarah's hand gripping my arm, her nails digging into my skin. And then, slowly, miraculously, his toe moved. Then another. Then his whole foot flexed. Dr. Matthews dropped his clipboard. It clattered on the hardwood floor with a deafening bang. For the first time in all the months I had known him, he was utterly speechless. He stared at Leo's foot, then at his chart, then back at the foot, his carefully constructed world of scientific certainty crumbling around him. But the miracle wasn't over. From the other bed, a small voice piped up. "Me too, Daddy. Look, me too." We all turned, and we watched, frozen in collective awe, as Liam, my sweet, quiet Liam, who had been even more profoundly affected by the injury, lifted his entire leg a full inch off the mattress. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Doctors flew in from all over the country. There were tests, scans, and endless consultations. No one could explain it. The MRIs still showed severe damage to the spinal cord. According to all known medical science, what was happening was impossible. The signals should not be getting through. But they were. The boys entered an intensive rehabilitation program, and their progress was staggering. First they were sitting up. Then they were crawling. Last Tuesday, holding onto my hands, Leo took his first wobbly, uncertain step. The doctors call it unprecedented neuroplasticity. They're writing papers about it, calling it a 1 in a billion anomaly. They have their scientific terms and their theories, but I know the truth. I see it every evening when I come home from work. Maria is no longer just our maid. She's family. Often I'll find her sitting with the boys, not praying, but laughing as they show her how they can now build their Lego towers taller than ever. Her miracle wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It was quieter. It was the unwavering power of her faith, a force that bent the rules of the universe. It didn't fix my sons overnight, but it opened a door that every doctor and I had believed was sealed forever. It reminded me that there are connections in this world that cannot be measured by instruments, and that sometimes the most powerful solutions aren't found in a lab, but in the quiet, humble heart of someone who dares to believe. I still believe in science, but now I believe in other things too. I believe in hope, and I believe in Maria.